Of course.
We we are of the same age cohort. I was born in 1951, after the war, and my mother was also born in Łódź.
Really?
Yes,
Okay.
but she was quite a bit older than you. She was born in 1917, and
Yes.
she she was caught up in the tragedy of the Lodz Ghetto and subsequent
Wow. Hmm.
concentration camps. I'm so glad you could make this a Zoom. I think this is going to work actually just as well,
Good.
if not better,
Thank
than
you for
having you
being
in
so
person.
accommodating.
That's okay.
I'm really grateful.
It's a reflection of how badly I wanted to talk to you, not only on a personal level, because your book meant so much to me, and I hate to use the cliche, but it resonated with me in many, many ways.
Good.
Um, but also for the group that you're going to be addressing. After we watch your son's film, we're going to launch into a discussion, and I'll share this video or parts of this video after I introduce your background, which is really quite astounding, Esther. You've accomplished a lot in your life.
Thank you. I came from a shtetl that, or my family did, with that still have dirt roads. And I often wonder what would have happened if we had stayed there. But here we are.
Here we are. And that actually brings me to my first question, if you don't mind if we launch right in.
Go
Uh,
ahead.
the title of your memoirs, I want you to know we're still here. Who's
Mhm.
the you? I want you
Yes.
to know
So
we're still here.
it's a great question. And it was always the working title. When I first did an outline for my agent, this was just always the working title. And the U was quite literally when I went back to Ukraine, of course, thinking I was going back to Poland, which is where my parents thought they came from and did. I visited the mass graves of both of my grandmothers and my aunts, of course, who I had never met. And what I wanted to say to them is they thought everybody, I'm sure they thought there would be nothing left of their families. And we're still here.
Yeah.
And that's the literal um, reason for that title. But I think there are lots of other ways to see that title. Of course, here we are as Jews after 6 million were murdered. We're still here. Um, but it originated with that. When I went to Ukraine, I decided I wanted to leave something of myself behind. And I chose our family's Shana Tova, our New Year's card, where every year, we've been blessed with more and more grandchildren, and the family has grown. And that's what I wanted to leave behind for my ancestors, for my grandparents.
So the you is a look backward and a look forward,
Yes,
because you are letting them know that even though there was this unspeakable tragedy where so many were wiped out, that you're still here and your
right.
family's still here. And it's also, I think, an expression of your desire to let your sons and your grandchildren know that in spite of terrible tragedy and hard times, that we survive. We survived and we survive. Yeah,
Exactly. And I think generally for the readers that the Jewish people survived.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Um, go
I'm a
ahead.
real believer in telling stories, and that probably was apparent. And I think it's important for future generations to understand where they came from. And there's
Yeah,
been a lot of work done in this area, mainly out of Emory University by a couple of researchers who studied the 9/11 families, the who the children who lost parents, and they found that those who understood where their family had come from were better able to move forward into the future. As a family, we've been blessed. Our children have been successful. They lead good lives. Our grandchildren, so far, knock on wood, have been doing great. But it's important for them to know life wasn't a straight line, and it may not be, but you can survive.
Yeah.
And resilience is important, and that they come from strength.
One of the reasons that I founded the Triangle Jewish Genealogical Society is I had such an epiphany going back to Poland myself after my mother passed away and finding out the details of what had happened to her family. I actually walked in the footsteps of my mother and father's Holocaust story. And it was, everything was illuminated.
Yes,
Everything
yes.
about me, about, why I was the way I was. And I actually was struck when I watched read your son's book and then saw the film, and then read later on that he actually didn't get the story right, that nothing was really illuminated, mainly maybe because he was young, but it sounded like he was not well prepared
Right, and
for
that's
the
partly my
journey.
fault.
Why?
Why? Well, I didn't know as much then as I learned after his book
Mhm.
came out. Of course, the fact that nothing was illuminated in the book actually did illuminate the family story ultimately, because people
Yes.
started coming to me and saying nothing is true in this book. Of course not, it's a work of fiction. But they'd say, I know the real story. And I started to listen to those stories and put it together. And uh, then it became illuminated.
How did you how did you feel or think watching Jonathan's film or reading his book to see your family's history transformed in this way?
Yeah, well, it took more than one reading. I mean, here I am reading the work, and of course, it felt different in the original, and then when it became a bestseller,
Yeah.
and I could take pride in it. Our family story is described in magical realism with lots of sex, and the ways that a 20-year-old would tell a story,
Mhm.
would imagine a story to fill a hole in his life. Uh, but at the end, I was so grateful because he gave me back my story, even if it wasn't true.
Yeah,
Here on the pages of his book, he had my father's name. He talked about the shtetls, and it was a gift.
it was. It was a gift to all of the children of survivors. Do you think the grandfather was your father? You,
Uh,
I mean, one of the things that struck me in Jonathan's work was the suicide
yeah.
of the character. And then when I read your book and found out that your father had committed suicide, I thought my first reaction was that was a somewhat rare occurrence in Holocaust families. I do know of one suicide among my mother and father's network of
Mhm.
friends. To think that someone survived the most horrible
Right.
event in Jewish history and perhaps in world history, to survive that and then to take your own life. Um, I just wondered how you responded to that.
So, a couple of things. It wasn't as rare as you think. I did some research on that, and it wasn't that rare. These are people who walked out of Europe, walked out of the Holocaust, but somehow didn't survive. And the interesting thing is, Jonathan didn't know that when he wrote his book. He did not know that my father had committed suicide.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And so what was going on where we never talked about it in our family. My husband didn't know. So that was another way in which his book opened me up.
Hmm.
Now how that happened, and he was the one who ultimately opened it up, not only because of the book, but when he was on book tour, he met somebody who actually told him, yes, your grandfather committed suicide.
Oh my.
So there were a lot of revelations. that came out of the writing, and revelations in a good way, in that we could stop keeping secrets.
Mhm. The I agree with you that maybe suicides weren't all that rare among survivors. It was certainly rare in my little sphere
Right,
growing up in Skokie, Illinois, which is really just a shtetl too.
right,
It's a
right.
suburb of Chicago. You're probably familiar with it.
Mhm.
Um, do you think had your father been able to see the result of your research, finding, for example, what happened to your half sister, do you think that would have made a difference?
I don't know. Or would he have, if he could have seen his grandchildren?
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
And and sadly, I was 8. I didn't really know him.
yeah,
Um, I don't know. I wish I knew, and there are times when I wish I could tell him
yeah.
um, what happened. I went to his grave after I returned from my trip and brought stones from his little shtetl and stones from where my half sister was murdered and where there's a tombstone. I don't know if it's the exact same place, but where there is a marker. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't.
After my mom died in 2008, all of a sudden this time opened up for me to go back. And, I wish my mother were here because I have so many more questions to ask her. But I did find out that one of her 7 siblings was alive at the end of the war. I have been trying for the last 15 years to find out what his fate was, but he just disappeared. I know he was alive. In 1945, he registered in the town of Cella with the Jewish community that survived there. But what happened to him afterwards, I don't know. And I often wonder if my mother were alive, would I tell her that her middle brother, who was so dear to her, perhaps of all of her siblings, was still alive at the end of the war? Would that make her feel wonderful? Would it make her feel even more depressed to know
Yes,
that somehow they missed each other in that great diaspora that happened after World War II? A lot of what if questions, yes?
a
Yeah,
lot of what if
yeah,
questions.
yeah. Another author who I've read is Avram Ben David Val, his book about Trockenbrod.
I,
Yeah, and I know you know him.
I know him, and he's one of the people that opened doors for me.
Yeah.
It's he was one of the people that called me after Jonathan's book came out, and he was one of those who said, "Oh, none of it is true. I can't believe you wrote this, and I know the real story." And I was like, "Okay." And it took me a while to reach out to him and to say,
Mhm.
"Okay, I'm ready to hear what you have to say." So yes, I knew him well. Unfortunately, he's died, but he organized a gathering of Trochenbrod survivors in Washington, and I helped him with that.
Yeah.
And that too. And we had 150 people who showed up from all over the United States. I mean, this was a tiny shtetl. And this community still has a bond, maybe because it was small, because everybody was intermarried. Uh, it was amazing to see the strength of that bond to this place continue into future generations.
The town sounds magical to me. It
And
it
it
just
doesn't exist. It doesn't.
it's like a Jewish Shangri-La, you know?
Exactly. And it's interesting. There's a very important Jewish developer in Washington who's a distant cousin of mine. Uh, and I thought, maybe you want to rebuild this into some sort of Disneyland or Shangri-La. Uh, and maybe this magical quality is something in our minds because it no longer exists.
Mhm.
But it does have a magical quality. And I probably mention in the book that in Israel, there is a house of Trochenbrod. It's called Beit Tal,
Mhm.
House of Trochenbrod and Legist. And survivors continued to hang together, to form community in Israel. One of the survivors made some money and said, okay, we can buy a building and it can be our little synagogue. And because he did that, they bought a building, they have a place, they have memorial plaques, and also it's big enough that they rent part of it out to the Israeli health authorities, so they have money, so that they're able to help support Trochenbrod families, and they were able to subsidize Trochenbroders who wanted to go back to see the shtetl.
Amazing. That's
Yeah, so
amazing.
that kind of investment has paid off big time for keeping this community together.
What is that yearning for a past that no longer exists? How do you explain that? I went back to my grandparents, such small towns. They were smaller than shtetls, and there was not much left of the Jewish community that used to live there. But if I could, I'd go back over and over and over again just to walk in their footsteps. I don't know quite what the attraction is. Maybe you can explain it to me.
I wish I could, but yes, it was when I went back to my mother's shtetl, and I sat with her beforehand, and we drew a map of where everybody lived, and because she lived into a long, wonderful, long life, I had stories, and I felt like I was walking in her footsteps. And one of the most powerful things was there's a river. To call it a river is probably a huge overstatement, but there is this water feature. And I know she used to go there on Shabbat, that she would go there with a guy on a date. And it felt so powerful to walk along the edge of that river and to visualize her not just as a Holocaust survivor, but as a woman, as a teenager, somebody who had a life that included dreams and men and uh, Shabbat walks along the banks. It was really powerful to feel to be in that place and to imagine their life beyond the murders.
Yeah, I think that is part of the attraction for me too, the life before. What was that like? And it is a very mystical, spiritual
Yes.
experience. I've had several of them. One was in the Lodge Cemetery, in the Wood Cemetery. Have you been there, Esther?
No, not since I was born there. I left there as a 6-month-old and I have not been back.
Well, it's a mystical place.
Is it? I
Um,
need to
it's
go then.
it's really two places. There's the cemetery that actually still has the markings of what was going to be a mass grave for the couple of hundred survivors that were probably going to be murdered by the Nazis around January of 45. There's that old part. And then there's the part for the Lodz Ghetto cemetery for the 40,000 people that died during the time of the Łódź Ghetto. And I asked my guide to explain to me why was the newer section, even now, uh, 60 years later, there were hardly any trees, whereas the old section was so overforested that we could barely find my family graves. And my guide pointed to the new section of the ghetto, which is quite barren. And he said, because God wants to see what happened here. And it was just, goosebumps. And then another time when we were in the old overforested part, we did find one of my ancestors' graves. It was my great grandmother. My mother never told me that there were ancestors still, their graves were in what she never talked about it. And it could have been because she was so overwhelmed by the losses of her parents and her brothers and sisters that she didn't even think to tell me, well, you still have a place you can go and
Right.
watch. And when we found my great grandmother's grave, I said to my guide, could you please say Kaddish for my grandmother? My great grandmother, I don't know how to say the prayer. I wasn't raised to be very
Mm.
religious. And he said, well, I can't do that. We have to have a minyan. And I said, really? I said, I'm here. This is probably a once in a lifetime thing. And he said, wait a minute. And he left me alone in this place of tombstones and overwhelming
Mm.
trees for about 10 minutes. And I thought, I'm never going to find my way out. And when he came back, he was surrounded by 10 young men wearing white, wearing an Israeli flag on their as a badge. I thought I was hallucinating, Esther. I thought this, what is happening? I couldn't even take my camera out because I was so stunned. It turned out, and of course, they circled me, circled my grandmother's grave, and not only said the prayer, but they also um, sang some kind of song. And then later on, they disappeared back from where they came from. It was like that scene in Field of Dreams,
Yes,
where the
yes.
baseball players come out of the woods. It turned out that the Israeli army sends volunteers to Łódź every year to clean up the cemetery, especially the cemetery from the where people were buried during the time of the ghetto. So it really wasn't all that supernatural, but it certainly felt supernatural at the time.
So your guide was Jewish, I'm guessing.
Um, Yes, he was. And he spoke French and very bad English. And I had another guide who spoke Polish to my French and partially English speaking guide as well. So it was really two guides in one. I needed a lot of help. But I was prepared when I did go back because I knew exactly what I was looking for. Um, I,
I went into the woods, which were hard to find, where the mass grave was, where my family from my mother's shtetl, where they were buried, where they'd been walked out into the woods, and had the same experience. Here we are in the middle of the woods. I'm here with my oldest son, and I'm thinking, oh my God, will we ever get out of here? And we were with our guide was there, but you could feel the trees just
Mhm.
coming in on you. Uh, Maybe I was feeling what I thought my grandmother was feeling as she was holding the hands of her grandchildren.
Mm,
But it was really powerful to walk into those woods and to
yeah.
feel surrounded by these trees.
That's why I always encourage my Genealogy Society members. I said, you can do all the paper research you want, but you've got to walk in their footsteps. You
Yeah.
have to go to the old country because you have to understand part of the topography of where
Yeah.
your family came from. Often the topography, the geography is such a central character in someone's life, just as you described, and just as I in that little documentary, The Lost Town, it's
Mhm.
it's so very clear that the geography, the layout of this town was extremely special and influential on
Mhm.
people's uh, upbringing there. And tell me a little bit about your oldest son who went back with you. You didn't take Jonathan, or Jonathan didn't go.
Well, so it was a hard decision to make the trip. Something I always wanted to do, but that I needed the courage to do. And it turned out that courage came from the fact that a group of Israeli Trochenbrod survivors were going, and it made sense to tack my trip onto theirs. So my husband said, I don't want you to go alone. I'll go with you, but it's really not my trip. And if one of the boys will go, they should go. But if not, I'm here for you. And my youngest son, Josh, desperately wanted to go, but he couldn't at that time. And I don't remember what the circumstances were. I asked Jonathan, he said, I've done that. I've been there, you know.
Hmm.
And he's somebody who he's written a number of books since everything is illuminated. And once he finishes a project, he finishes it and he's moved on to the next.
Hmm.
Uh, but then Frank, our oldest son, is a historian and he's a journalist, and he really wanted to go. And he was the perfect travel companion. Um, we would, even when we were in the midst of other Truchlin brothers, we would meet every morning and he would tape me on some little device that was popular then, a flip camera. about what we were going to do and what my expectations were, what my hopes were for the day. And then at the end of the evening, we'd have, no matter if there were other people around, we always have some part of our dinner together or coffee and go through the day, and usually do that in tears.
Mm.
Um, so to be able to share that with somebody for whom it's also their story was
Mhm.
so powerful. And then every night we'd send an email back to the family because our trip, there were revelations virtually every day. And apparently they were waiting at the other end, with bated breath to hear
Mhm.
what the day was like. But it was so powerful to do it with my child.
I not only can imagine, I've actually taken my daughter volunteered to come along on the second trip back. And I'm hoping that experience will stick with her for the rest of her life, and that one day she'll bring my grandchildren and do the same thing. And we've also gone to Budapest, where my father was from. He came from the first suburb north of Budapest, and we have found cousins who survived and have. That's been an amazing part of the journey as well. I was going to ask you along those lines. For those of my friends and colleagues here who haven't been back to the old country, now that you've done this and you've watched your son Jonathan not do it maybe the right way, what would you recommend that people do to prepare themselves for this journey? Even if it's not a Holocaust story that they're looking
Mhm.
at, what should people do to prepare?
Preparation was the key. If I had gone in there like Jonathan, I would have probably not found anything.
Mhm.
I spent a lot of time and actually a lot of money preparing. Everything from, I'm looking at my desk here, going to the Library of Congress, which has a map room. I don't know what it's like now, 15 years later, but uh, going through maps, looking at the topography of these areas, and they have maps going by. They'll tell you that they're from the 18th century. You can actually look at what these shtetls look like. What's interesting in the case of my shtetls, it hasn't changed much. Um, and then I hired, as you did, a guide, and I interviewed a number of people. There are now people, this is a business, Jewish genealogy in Eastern Europe, and there are some well-known people who do this. I ended up with a young woman who's not a professional, but there was something about our conversation that she was so invested in it that she did what they call in the media world, she was a fixer. She went out. That's what they call it. They set up the interviews for you, the fixer. If you're going to drop in as a reporter, you want to know that you've met the right people. She went from village to village, interviewed people, showed them pictures, found the oldest people. And that's one of the keys, talking to the oldest people in these villages. And she found them, and she went back several times to set this trip up, and it made a huge, I don't think I would have found what I have found without that. Um, and when we arrived on our flight, and she and her father picked us up at the Lvov airport, Frank said to her, "So how certain are you that you found these people that are descendants of the people who hid his grandfather?" And she said, 90% certain. And he said, "Why 90%?" And she said, "The last 10% is up to you." And then when we were there in their home, in this tiny village with maybe a couple dozen houses, maybe only a dozen, I don't know, maybe 2 dozen. Um, I said to Frank, "Is this for real? Have we really found this?" And he said, 110%.
Well, what is your next project? Obviously your life has, you've done some amazing things. This book is now, the book that you wrote was published in 2021, I think.
2020, the paperback in 2021. Yeah.
Okay. So what's next on your radar?
So thank you for asking that. I've spent the last couple of years I've been involved with Jewish organizations,
Mhm.
helping to found something called Sixth and I, which is a Jewish cultural center in Washington. What's interesting is those kinds of, professionally, I had the opportunity after a long career in public affairs to move into the Jewish world. It was an unexpected opportunity. And I was always looking forward. My involvement was with building a Jewish future, at the same time as remembering the past, but not being so absorbed in that. My last, I'm just looking at my desk here. Uh, I chaired the Capitol Jewish Museum, Washington's first Jewish museum, not the Holocaust Museum, but telling
Mhm.
the story of Jewish Washington, and was able to be the chair to open that museum. It was important for me to look forward, uh, to build a world for my children and my grandchildren. That the Holocaust is the core of my story, but it's not what is going to sustain us. And I feel very strongly about that. So what's my next project? I'm just looking around my home office here. I don't think there's anything here I can show you. Uh, I've been, well, I have pictures, I have boxes of photographs, making sure those are labeled. My next project is one of my granddaughters said to me when she came in here and looked at the boxes, she said, "Grandma, how will I know who these people are?" So I'm playing with writing something, another book perhaps, about objects and the stories they tell. And in the book, you've read that when I was there, what do you bring back? I brought back dirt from each of the mass graves.
Yeah, I saw that theme carried forward in the film, the little
Yeah.
bags of things.
Isn't that interesting? And that was before I did it. So I don't know who was carrying what forward. But
It must be in
Jonathan,
the family DNA.
it is in the DNA. We're both collectors.
Yeah.
And those little jars have most recently been in an exhibit in Vienna. I got a call from the Jewish Museum of Vienna saying, "We're doing something on memory in the Holocaust. Can we borrow your jars?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, "Well, we have to insure them. It's going to a museum and we're going to send an art mover to pack them." And she said, "So what are they worth?" And I said, "Well, they're kind of worthless, but they're also priceless." So I'm going to document some of the things in that are both worthless and priceless, because future generations, my grandchildren, won't necessarily know what they are. I have the suitcase, it's tiny, that my parents bought me to carry on the ship when we came to America. They had the forethought to say, okay, I was almost 3, that I'd probably want my own little suitcase. Uh, but I want my great grandchildren, when they look at that, not just throw it away, but to know
Right.
where it came from.
That's
I
interesting. That's the one of the artifacts that one of the few artifacts I have is my mother's suitcase from when they came to the United States. We donated it to the Skokie Museum, the
Mhm.
Illinois Holocaust Museum, because I was worried that that's exactly what would happen to it, that it would be one of those
Right.
things that gets picked up. Nobody knows what it's all about. So
Exactly. And
but what a wonderful idea for a project. We often talk as genealogists about not recognizing the people in these photographs and why did grandma keep this? And having to it's an arduous task to go back and label everything, but it's so necessary.
okay, so I need to take you upstairs to
Okay.
show you something. Can we do that? Are you going to
Absolutely.
edit this?
Yes, yes, I
Okay.
will.
All right, we're going to go upstairs, and you're going to see one of my photo projects recently. Um, I'm taking you through. what one of my sons calls my laboratory, and another one says it's a porter's delight.
Hard to tell the difference sometimes.
Yeah, and you'll see this is our downstairs, and I'm passionate about pictures. And I'm lucky to have people, grandchildren in those pictures. Okay, now we're going up the stairs. I'll show
Okay.
you my dirt jars. The
Okay.
most important ones. So it was for a long time in this wonderful exhibit in Vienna that I went to see. And now
Oh,
it's at the Jewish Museum in Munich. Uh, I'll start with the jars. Actually, here's my little suitcase.
oh my. Oh my.
And at some point, yes, it'll go to a museum, and the Holocaust Museum wants it, but in the meantime, I need to document it. Um, okay, so,
Oh my. Oh my, Esther, what a collection.
and it's on my mantle. Well, now it's included lots of other things. Um, I don't, the Rome ghetto, uh, it's included, Australia. The ones, the ones from the Holocaust are right now in a museum, but it's expanded. Even my grandchildren will bring me back something from a trip, the beach in Tel Aviv. Okay, now you're going to see my messy kitchen.
It's much more
But
meaningful than bringing home a kitchen magnet. I can tell you that.
yes, exactly. So what do you bring back? So let's see, how do I do this?
Maybe that should be the title of your next book, What We Bring Back.
So
This is wonderful.
so what
That's
I'm
your
going to
family tree.
exactly. So what I like this is my darn, this is my grandmother and I've and my grandfather and God, I'm not doing this very well. Let me see if I sit and bring them over, or you can see them behind me. Uh,
Yes.
I had a little minor surgery. It was nothing. And I had like a week to recuperate. And I had these wooden blocks and decided that I would do this is my husband's family and my family. This is my husband's great grandfather. And he encouraged me to label who they were and who their parents were. Um, this is Jonathan.
Yes.
But then I would do pictures from different points in their lives. And the kids play with these. This is Frank, who went on the trip with me. There he is as a little kid.
Mhm.
Um, but
What a great way for kids,
yeah,
children, to tactily get in touch, literally get in touch with the past.
right. And to see the building
Yeah.
of a family.
Lovely, Esther. Just lovely. What
Yeah.
an inspiring idea. I do hope you turn that project into something that we can all enjoy because it's a wonderful idea. And I think we all have those kinds of things and are a little bit perplexed by what to
Yes,
do with them to make them
right.
meaningful to the next generation, especially.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah,
this I had so much fun doing this. And I'm trying to decide where to put it because it's meant to be played with and to build upon, to see yourself in a line.
that's right. That you're part of something bigger and that you're
Right.
still here.
Exactly. Exactly.
Esther, I don't want to keep you any longer. I could talk to you for hours about other things in your book that touch me, but I think what I'll do is I'll write you an email. I wanted to recommend a book to you that I think you would like called The Lost Shtetl. It was a Jewish Book Award winner about
Oh, yes.
about a magical place like Trockenbrod. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for
Thank you.
bringing your story to the public, for sharing it, um, sharing some what I know were painful memories, but also to make us realize that that's just part of our story. It isn't the whole story. And the meaningfulness of traveling to the old country to understand not only more about our ancestors, but more about us too.
Ourselves,
That's
right.
right. Thank you,
Exactly.
Esther.
Thank you. Thank
All
you
right.
so much. Look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, I'll be in touch. Bye bye.